They handed my dad a plastic cup while everyone else drank from crystal. I saw it happen. A waiter walked past a table full of guests holding shining glasses. When he reached my father, he paused, looked unsure, then grabbed a cheap plastic cup from the bar and handed it to him instead. My dad didn't say a word. He just nodded and thanked him. A few minutes later, one of the event coordinators rushed over and asked, "Sir, are you here to help with parking?" The valet is backed up. My dad was standing near the driveway, checking his phone. The actual valet was right there in uniform. But because my father wore a simple navy suit and drove his old pickup truck, they assumed he worked there. I opened my mouth to correct them, but my dad gently said, "No, I'm a guest." The coordinator looked embarrassed for half a second, then walked away without apologizing. Inside the estate, the music was soft and expensive. Everything looked perfect. Arden's family had spared no cost. When my dad tried to make small talk with a group of her relatives, one man asked what he did for a living. Dad answered calmly, "I built a logistics company about 20 years ago." The man laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. "Oh, that's nice," he said, clearly not believing him. Another guest glanced at my dad's worn leather shoes and smirked. I stood there frozen. I should have stepped in. I should have said something. Instead, I just felt this heat in my chest, like shame mixed with anger. Across the lawn, Leland Hargrove watched everything. He didn't stop it. In fact, when he introduced my father to someone, he said, "This is Brennan's dad. He's very hardworking." The pause said everything. My dad stayed calm the whole time. He observed. He listened. He didn't defend himself. That almost hurt more. Then, just as the speeches were about to begin, a black sedan pulled up outside the gates. A sharply dressed man stepped out and looked around like he was searching for someone important. He walked straight through the crowd and asked, "Where can I find Calder Whitmore?" The air shifted. Conversations slowed. And for the first time that night, every eye turned to my father. Most people at that party saw an older man in a simple suit and assumed that was his whole story. They had no idea where he came from or what he had built. My dad grew up in a small town in Montana. No family money. No connections. His father worked at a grain mill. His mother cleaned houses. He started working when he was 14, fixing fences and loading trucks. After high school, he didn't go to some big university. He worked, saved, failed, and tried again. By his early 30s, he had started a small transportation company with 2 trucks and a rented warehouse. Over the years, that small company turned into something much bigger. He moved freight across state lines, then built storage facilities, then managed infrastructure contracts. It wasn't flashy work, but it was steady and smart. A few months ago, he sold almost half of the company to a private investment group. The deal was worth more money than I could fully understand. He never celebrated it publicly. He didn't upgrade his truck. He didn't buy a mansion. He just went back to work the next morning. I never cared about any of that. When I met Arden, I wasn't thinking about wealth or status. I loved how confident she was, how she walked into a room like she owned it. I thought that confidence was strength. But her family measured everything in numbers and last names. At dinners, her father would talk about legacy and real wealth. Sometimes he would look at me and say things like, "There's a difference between building comfort and building empires." I knew what he meant. He thought my family was small compared to theirs. My dad noticed it too. A few weeks before the engagement party, he sat with me on the porch and said quietly, "Son, pride can hide behind smiles. Make sure they respect you, not just tolerate you." I told him he was overthinking. I believed love would balance everything out. I thought if I treated them well, they would eventually see us as equals. At the party, when they underestimated him, he didn't react. He could have corrected them at any moment. He chose not to. He stood there, calm and patient, because he didn't want to ruin my night. He swallowed his pride for me. As the evening moved on, the comments became sharper. One of Arden's uncles stood beside my dad and looked him up and down. "So," he said with a half smile, "you still doing manual labor, or did you finally move up to a desk?" A few people nearby chuckled like it was harmless fun. Before my dad could answer, another man added, "You can always tell blue-collar DNA. Hard work shows in the hands." He glanced at my father's fingers like he was inspecting something rough. My dad simply said, "Work is work. It feeds families." His voice was steady, not defensive. Later, when Leland gathered a small group to introduce us formally, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "This is Brennan's dad. He's very hardworking. Built something small from the ground up. The way he said small made it clear what he thought of it. I felt my jaw tighten. When we went to find our seats for dinner, I noticed my father's name on the card read Calvin Whitman. Not even close. My name was spelled correctly. Arden's was perfect. But my dad's wasn't. His table was near the back of the lawn, close to the catering station doors where staff moved in and out carrying trays. Every time the door swung open, bright kitchen lights flashed behind him. I looked at Arden, expecting her to say something, to fix it, to at least notice. She glanced at the card, hesitated, then said quietly, "It's just a small mistake. Don't make it awkward." That was the moment something shifted inside me. I watched her laugh with her friends while my dad sat down without complaint. He adjusted the chair himself when it wobbled. He didn't call anyone over. He didn't ask for a change. When I walked over, he looked up at me and must have seen the anger on my face. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder gently. It was a small gesture, but it said everything. Don't ruin your night. I'm fine. Right then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. I saw the name Gideon Pike. My dad studied it for a second, then silenced the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Later," he said quietly, and he went back to smiling like nothing was wrong. The music slowed as the man from the black sedan stepped onto the lawn. He didn't look around like a guest who felt out of place. He moved with purpose, scanning faces until his eyes landed on my father. His expression changed instantly. He walked straight across the grass, past tables filled with people who moments earlier had been laughing at my dad. When he reached him, he smiled wide and held out his hand. "Mr. Whitmore," he said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I was hoping you'd be here." My dad stood up, calm as ever. "Rowan, I didn't know you were in town." Rowan Kessler. I recognized the name from business news articles I'd seen months ago. He didn't act like a man meeting someone beneath him. He looked like someone meeting a mentor. He shook my father's hand firmly and said, "I wouldn't have half my portfolio without the advice you gave me back in Denver. You took a chance on me when no one else would." A few heads turned. Conversation slowed. Then Rowan said something that made the entire table go silent. "Congratulations on the $86 million valuation, by the way. That was a strong exit. Most founders would have held out longer, but you timed it perfectly." I felt my heart pound. 86 million. Someone at the next table dropped a fork. Rowan continued, unaware of the shock spreading around us. "And I heard about the expansion plans. If you move forward with the infrastructure project, that's easily 9 figures in the next phase." Whispers started. I saw guests lean toward each other. I saw phones come out discreetly, probably searching his name. Across the lawn, Leland Hargrove stood frozen. The confident smile he'd been wearing all night faded. His posture changed. He straightened his jacket and began walking toward us, slower than before. My dad didn't puff his chest. He didn't brag. He didn't correct anyone who had doubted him earlier. He simply nodded and said, "We'll see how things develop." For the first time that night, I saw something in his eyes. Not revenge. Not anger. Just quiet pride. And it wasn't pride in the money. It was pride in knowing he never needed to prove himself to anyone in that room. The tension in the air hadn't settled when another car pulled up near the entrance. This time, a tall man stepped out holding a slim leather briefcase. He walked quickly, scanning the crowd the same way Rowan had. When he reached us, he nodded politely. "Mr. Whitmore, sorry to interrupt. I tried calling earlier." My dad gave him a calm look. "It's fine, Gideon." The name caught a few people's attention. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "These need your signature tonight, so we can finalize the transfer. The trust structure for Brennan has been approved." I blinked. "Trust." Gideon spoke clearly, not realizing how many people were now listening. "Yes, the family trust tied to the partial sale. Once signed, it secures long-term holdings and the allocation for future grandchildren." The table behind us went completely quiet. My dad signed the papers without making a scene. He handed the folder back like it was routine, like it wasn't life-changing. That's when Leland finally reached us. His tone had changed. It was softer now, almost eager. "Calder," he said, using his first name for the first time that night. "I had no idea you were making such significant moves. We should have talked more." My dad looked at him steadily. "I was actually considering placing a sizable investment into Hargrove Developments this quarter," he said in a calm voice. "I like to support family ventures." Leland's eyes lit up. But, my dad continued, I believe partnerships work best when there's mutual respect. I'm rethinking a few things. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it hit harder than any insult thrown earlier. Within minutes, the same people who had laughed were suddenly standing closer, asking questions, complimenting his vision, telling him how impressive his journey was. One of the men who joked about manual labor now called him a brilliant operator. I stood there watching it happen in real time. Nothing about my dad had changed. Only their knowledge of his net worth had. That's when it became painfully clear to me. Their respect wasn't about character. It wasn't about values. It was about numbers. And without those numbers, they would have kept handing him plastic cups. After the crowd finally drifted away from my dad, I needed air. I walked toward the side patio near the garden lights. That's when I heard Arden's voice. She was standing with her cousin near the stone railing, holding a glass of champagne. She didn't see me in the shadows. Well, I guess he's not as small town as I thought, she said with a short laugh. Her cousin smirked. You look pretty shocked. Arden sighed. I just didn't expect that. I mean, the truck, the suit, it was embarrassing for a minute. My chest tightened. Her cousin asked quietly, Were you actually worried? Arden shrugged. I just didn't want the vibe ruined. Tonight was supposed to feel polished. When people started asking if he was staff, it was awkward. Awkward. That word hit harder than the jokes earlier. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. Embarrassing? I asked. She jumped slightly when she saw me. Brennan, I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? My voice was steady, but inside I felt something breaking. She lowered her voice. I was just stressed. My family can be judgmental. I didn't want them looking down on us. I didn't want it to reflect badly. On who? I asked. On us, she repeated quickly. It's not about him personally. I just didn't want to damage the vibe of the night. Damage the vibe. My dad had been insulted for hours. And she was worried about the vibe. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps on gravel. I turned slightly and saw my father standing a few feet away. He must have come looking for me. He didn't say anything. I don't know how much he heard, but he heard enough. He gave me a small look. Not angry. Not hurt. Just tired. Arden tried to reach for my hand. You know I love you. This doesn't change anything. But it did. For the first time since we got engaged, I felt distance. Not because of money. Not because of pride. Because when my father was being disrespected, the woman I planned to marry was worried about appearances. And in that moment, I started questioning everything. Later that evening, when most of the guests had returned to laughing and pretending nothing had happened, my dad asked Leland if they could speak privately. They stepped a short distance away from the tables, near the edge of the lawn. I stayed close enough to see their faces, but not close enough to interrupt. Leland looked confident again, like he believed everything had corrected itself. Calder, I'm glad we finally understand each other, he said smoothly. I think our families could build something powerful together. My dad listened without expression. When Leland finished outlining his expansion plans, my father spoke calmly. I've given it some thought, he said. And I've decided I won't be investing. Leland blinked. I'm sorry. I prefer partnerships built on mutual respect, my dad continued. His tone wasn't angry. It was steady. Business works best when both sides value each other beyond numbers. For a moment, Leland didn't respond. He forced a small laugh. If this is about earlier misunderstandings. It's not, my dad said gently. It's about clarity. The conversation ended there. No raised voices. No scene. What Leland didn't realize was that Rowan had been standing not far away during part of that talk. Later, I saw Rowan speaking quietly with his assistant, glancing toward Leland's direction. Over the next few weeks, things shifted in ways that weren't loud but were noticeable. Rowan had been exploring a joint venture with Hargrove Developments. Without my dad's involvement, that interest cooled. Other investors followed Rowan's lead. Meetings were postponed, then canceled. The big expansion project Leland had been boasting about at dinners suddenly stalled. Permits remained pending. Funding slowed. Contractors were left waiting for confirmation that never came. No one announced a collapse. There was no public embarrassment. It just unraveled. My dad didn't celebrate. He didn't speak about it again. When Leland reached out later, asking to revisit discussions, my father responded politely but briefly. He wished him well. There was no revenge speech. No threats. Just a clear boundary. Watching it unfold, I understood something important. Power doesn't need to shout. And the strongest move my father made that night wasn't revealing his wealth. It was choosing where not to place it. The next morning, I found Arden in the garden again, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I walked straight up to her and said, "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Brennan, what is it? You seem tense." "I can't do this," I said, my voice firm. "I can't marry you." She blinked like she didn't understand. "Wait, what? Why? Is this about your dad?" "Yes," I said. "It's about him. And it's about me. And about the kind of life I want to live." Her expression hardened. "So this is about money? You're calling this off because of money?" I shook my head. "No, this has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with respect. You were embarrassed by my father. You cared more about appearances than the man who raised me, the man who made me who I am." She took a step back. "Brennan, that's unfair." I interrupted. "No, it's not unfair. It's the truth. I chose the man who never once cared about money, who never tried to impress anyone with wealth or status. I chose him because he taught me what matters in life." Her face fell. I could see the shock and frustration, but nothing she said would change my mind. I slid the engagement ring off my finger and held it out. "I can't wear this anymore." Arden's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't wait. I turned and walked toward the driveway. The old pickup truck sat there where my dad had parked it the night before. I climbed in, and he followed silently. The engine roared to life, and we drove out of the estate together. I looked over at him. His eyes met mine, calm and proud. No words were needed. I didn't look back at the mansion or the party. I didn't need to. For the first time that morning, I felt free. Free from expectations. Free from pretending. Free to choose the people in my life who truly mattered. And as we drove down the long, quiet road, I realized that some endings weren't losses. They were the beginning of something real. Something honest. Months later, the news about Hargrove developments started trickling through the local business circles. The expansion project that Leland had boasted about had quietly collapsed. Contractors waited for confirmations that never came. Investors pulled back. Meetings that had been scheduled for months were canceled or postponed indefinitely. The company downsized quietly, letting staff go in small groups so it didn't make headlines, but the damage to its reputation was clear in whispers among peers. One afternoon, Leland called my dad. The tone was cautious, almost desperate. "Calder, I wanted to reach out. Maybe we can discuss some future opportunities. Things didn't go as planned, and I'd like to mend bridges." My dad listened politely. He responded in his calm, measured way. "I appreciate the gesture, Leland. I hope you find the right partners moving forward. No bitterness. No harsh words. Just boundaries." He didn't gloat. He didn't humiliate. He simply made it clear he wasn't interested in involvement or further business with anyone who had treated him disrespectfully. Meanwhile, I started spending more time at my dad's company. I didn't join because of the money or the recent success. I joined because I wanted to learn from him, to understand the values he ran his business with: integrity, patience, humility, and a quiet kind of confidence. Working alongside him, I began to see how he treated employees, investors, and even competitors, with fairness and respect, but without ever compromising on principle. I learned what leadership really meant, how it wasn't about loud announcements or showing off, but about decisions made with thought and responsibility. I realized how much I had underestimated him before. Not just as a businessman, but as a man who had quietly built everything from nothing, who had survived insults, laughter, and condescension, and had never let it change who he was. Life had shifted. Arden was no longer in it. Leland's company was struggling, and I was finally learning what it meant to carry myself with pride without arrogance. Being at my dad's side, I understood that real success wasn't about wealth alone. It was about respect, values, and staying true to yourself. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere that really mattered. 6 months have passed since that night at the engagement party, and I still think about it almost every day. Not because of what happened there, but because of what it showed me about people, and about my father. Money didn't change him. Not for a second. The way he carried himself, the way he treated others, the quiet strength he had, none of it was about wealth. That was always who he was, long before anyone knew the numbers behind his name. What money did do was reveal everyone else. It revealed the people who were polite only when they thought it served them. It revealed Arden's concern for appearances instead of people. It revealed the Hargroves' true priorities. And it revealed the way some so-called friends measured a man not by his character, but by his bank account. Watching it all unfold taught me something I'll never forget. Respect is earned in ways money can't buy. It's earned through actions, through loyalty, through quiet integrity. My father didn't need to prove himself because he already had those things in abundance. I've spent the last half year working with him at his company. I've learned patience, leadership, and how to make decisions without letting ego get in the way. I've seen employees respect him not because he commands it, but because he gives it first. I've seen how a man who doesn't need to boast can inspire more than anyone who does. Sometimes I think back to that party, to the whispers, the laughter, and the dismissive glances. I feel anger for a moment, but then I look at my father, and it fades. He doesn't carry resentment. He doesn't need revenge. He only carries dignity, and that is something no one at that party could ever take from him. They treated my dad like trash because they thought he had nothing. They thought his old truck, his simple suit, and his quiet ways meant he was small, weak, and unworthy. Turns out, the only thing he didn't have was the need to prove himself. And that, more than any fortune or title, was worth more than anything in that room. It always will be.